Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Okay, everybody, here we go. We got our first guest coming on. It's the one and only Andre Vasquez, alderman of the mighty 40th Ward, a neighbor to the south and west of the great 49th Ward. And we've been trying to get Andre on for a while. He's been a frequent guest on our show, always full of information and a fun interview. He has been real busy. He's, I think he's the guy in charge in city council of the immigrant so-called crisis. So hello to you. And
hey,
how are you?
Michael? How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Are you keeping busy?
Yes. I mean, with everything that's happening with the current migrant challenge, when we're looking at budget, council, just general tensions across town, never a dull moment, always a lot of work to do.
Well, we're glad you're one of the alder persons. And are you in that socialist caucus or no?
So I am one of the Democratic Socialists, currently not in the caucus. I don't think the caucus has met in a while. So,
well, you are a progressive guy. We know that. And it's good to have you as a neighbor and friend. We've had a situation for a while now where, whether it's from U.S. policy, sanctions in the past, capitalism, whatever, lots of people are moving north from the South America, Central America, coming to Chicago, apparently a very popular place to come to, not only as a tourist, but as a future citizen. And we find that the governors of Florida and Texas have been sending busloads of migrants here on a regular basis. I think Chicagoans have stepped up to the plate in many ways. There are some real problems. Why don't you fill us in a little bit about how we're coping with, dealing with, planning to act out around 20,000 new visitors, largely from Venezuela?
Yeah, so just as you stated, you got about 20,000 new arrivals. I think close at this point to 12,000 in shelters, about 3,500 that are living in the police stations currently, right? So clearly a lot of it that's untenable by any municipal government. We only have about $150 million that are put towards this migrant challenge. That'll last you maybe till mid next year. And so what's necessary currently is for the president, and I say the president very specifically, it's not Congress because they can't figure things out. The president, through executive order, expanding work authorization. So it's not just the folks who got here before August 1st, that it's like everyone that needs it in the welcoming city. So that way you can unclog the bottleneck that we're seeing. And that through the state, that the governor coordinates other cities in Illinois to help take on some capacity as well. So just as you said, a lot of neighbors have been volunteering for over a year now with getting zero compensation to support all the folks that are in the police stations. And so we're grateful for that, but we also recognize, looking at the scale of the challenge, we need more partners to step up.
Do you think we were ready for this, or a little bit ready, or a little bit caught flat-footed?
I think completely caught flat-footed, right? I think we've said we're a sanctuary city because it speaks to our values, but we haven't had the infrastructure for this kind of challenge that we see now. And you know, also a way to kind of pose it is, if you look at the way the federal government works, and you said it exactly right, because of things they've done in other countries to destabilize governments, you have influx of folks that are coming. Because of climate change, that migration is going to continue to happen. But the federal government picks and chooses what somebody's path to citizenship or integration looks like. In the same time, we've gotten 20,000 Central Americans, Venezuelans. We've gotten 30,000 Ukrainians, and they've been integrated seamlessly through support systems provided by the federal government that these new arrivals aren't getting.
I was talking to Omar Lopez, who had been the Minister of Education for the Young Lords back in the day. And he was talking to my class at DePaul. He brought up how there were more Ukrainians that come than people have come from Venezuela, and they got handled very smoothly. Yeah. What's the difference?
Lack of melanin, if I had to be precise. Skin color, right? Largely folks that come from European countries get a different experience. And I'll say that that's not even as clear cut, right? Because when the Polish, the Irish, the Italian all came, it was the same narrative when they all touched down. But the on-ramp from that into integration is different based on what the federal government, which has largely been led by white males, decides is comfortable to them. And so I think that's affected a lot of it.
Well, here in Chicago, in my recent experience, last 20, 30 years, we had a number of people come from the Sudan. Lots of people came from Mexico. Many, many people, a lot of people from El Salvador, and now Venezuelans. And we've got a situation where this happened. I'm still not quite clear why the people coming from the Ukraine got to Chicago have been handled differently. Is that because there's a larger Ukrainian community that helped out?
It's some of it, right? But it's also having the incentives and support systems. I think also the narrative might appear different because when you're coming from a country at war, right, compared to what are economic challenges, I think people view that differently and are able to justify it differently. It's clear that because Congress is split, it becomes even harder to try to make those adjustments.
Yeah.
But even with the folks you mentioned, like Mexicans, other folks that have been here before, a lot of them are walking around undocumented and getting paid under the table. And so what we recognize is if you take the lens of capitalism, white supremacy off a little bit, right? These folks are going to become taxpayers. So why not make the on-ramp quicker? Because it adds to our tax base in a way that helps fund government and services the way we would want. And I think that's probably the reframing we need to all be talking about.
Yeah, I've been thinking about it. A lot of these people will become citizens. They will be neighbors. They will be voters in our city. And I'm a little, I think at first we were welcoming everybody, and all of a sudden we started seeing these little outbreaks of resistance. And some of it's probably justified. I mean, there's some Black Latino tension, where a lot of people in the city have their schools that got closed and money hasn't come. And all of a sudden there's a big effort to help newcomers. So I can understand that. But where does this leave us, like in the city council with Latinos and Blacks? So we like to think of us working together with some progressive whites to make a better Chicago, a better Illinois, a better world. But we're having some skirmishes on the ground.
I mean, as you see, we're having some skirmishes in the council as well. So I think all of it is part of the tension that just happens to be in the air because of the situation. Like, I think if you're a Black Chicagoan, you're very justifiably feeling a certain way about the situation because there are parts of town that have been needing investment, where folks have been organizing, fighting, begging for this kind of investment, are told there are no funds. And then now in this situation, see what feels like a flood of funds and investment coming. So, capitalism and scarcity causes us to look at a situation and say, well, if somebody's gaining something, we're losing something. And I think we as government could be doing a better job of creating mutual wins and figuring out how to solve for this. But because we have the tensions being what they are, some of that is manifesting in the council. Although largely we're all able to talk and get along, like we have different constituencies that we answer to. And so you then have to be in situations that are tense, given all the different perspectives on the issue.
Well, I would imagine in the council that does have a number of avowed socialists, you would have some people working for unity and trying to bridge the gap. Where we're at, who are the people we should be looking at, and anything good information to come on you could share about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are. Some of the other challenges, though, is I'll say that it pertains to like the progressive left in Chicago. They largely weren't talking about immigration at all, right? And so now you kind of see, oh, this is a real situation. I think largely people are trying to like digest and process and figure out what part to play. But now when they feel like progressive champions might be facing some level of attack, they want to attack back. And then that leads to like this increased tension rather than, hey, let's all find a way to talk. But there's folks like Maria Haddon, Matt Martin, Mike Rodriguez, myself, the Angela Clay, that are really trying to figure out how to have conversations. Like Jeanette Taylor, right, who is in the thick of it with Wadsworth. Like her and I talk regularly and have a very good relationship because I understand what that feels like because I've been on the ground in all the different wards as well. So, there's a lot of promise there. I think the challenge is us finding a moment to breathe rather than feel like it's crisis mode all the time in a way that doesn't allow for it.
Well, Andre Vasquez, isn't your role now as the head of the immigration situation? Is that one of your
So
tasks?
I'm the chair, so I appreciate that because I'm the chair of the committee, which means like we hold hearings and I try to call balls and strikes, right? But ultimately, the head ends up being the deputy mayor of immigrant and refugee rights, Beatriz Ponce de Leon. You also got Cristina Pasion Zayas, who is the deputy chief of staff that also does decision making, and then you've got the mayor's team. So we try our best to make sure the public finds out the information and like point out things that are concerning. Like when Garda World first, when we found out about it, I came out publicly saying I had concerns, right? Just to voice it. So I try my best to be independent in the role.
Well, one of the biggest things around all this immigration is where we're going to, you pointed out that there are 3,500 people sleeping in police stations still. And I know that we had people up here along the lakefront at Leon Beach. And I think there were some people at the old YMCA. There's people at the Armory. I do have a plan, and I don't know if you can figure a way to do it, but we should take St. Scholastica, which is being sold, and turn that into the Immigration Welcoming Center, and then later it can become a park district or a school. Hopefully it won't just be torn down and apartments built, but that's my idea. How do we, beyond that, how do we deal with the whole tent thing rather than putting people in buildings?
I think your analysis is right. It's one that I share, that like if you're purchasing property to use for this purpose, you can then repurpose it post the challenge to be community centers, to be affordable housing, to be shelters for folks who need it, because unhoused that are separate from the non-migrants still need that infrastructure as well. I think what I've seen lately is that the Archdiocese has been more open to conversation around some of their properties, because it's
they got some churches sitting empty.
Yeah, it's that, and like I saw Ronnie Mosley in the ward, they just purchased or got donated a big plot of land that they're going to make for Garda World tents at this moment, but once that's over with, making that a community site, making that something that's more vibrant.
What do you got on the near horizon about getting people out of police stations before it really starts snowing here?
Well, I mean, I think that's what we're looking at. That's why I think the base camps are becoming more and more a reality, because without the runtime to figure out leasing, buying properties, those negotiations, they're looking at it and saying, this is the quickest way we get something up to decompress. If not, when winter comes, it's going to be a worse situation. And so I do understand that it's a difficult decision in a difficult moment, but that is what they're looking to do.
One of the things that's come up in the city council is some resistance to our longtime designation as a sister city, where we are, have good relationships with places from other places. Some of that had to do with migrants in the past, like from El Salvador and stuff. What is the challenge to our designation as a sister city, and who's it coming from, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah, so I think it's coming from a lot of different angles because of the tension raised by the current crisis, right? So people are conflating the two issues and saying they're all sending the buses because we're a sanctuary city. So if we stop doing that, maybe the buses won't come. We're inviting them, right? The reality is sanctuary city is a specific, or they'll say we're spending too much money on the migrants, we're doing too much. The sanctuary city ordinance doesn't have anything to do with either of those challenges. All it says is, can police officers interact with federal law enforcement as it relates to people who are undocumented? We believe they should not. I think it leads to the kind of profiling, not only of undocumented folks, but people of color. It leads to misconduct cases. It leads to lawsuits. So it's just not a good idea. The reason why it's such a challenge that people are bringing it up is they're very frustrated about the crisis. Now, if you remove the sanctuary city ordinance and we were no longer that, it's not going to stop the buses, because we have the DNC coming in August no matter what.
That's right.
So the buses are going to keep happening. And so the other challenge is you've got elected officials who, because they're hearing all this tension from the community, think that's an easy answer they can give back, and others who think they can capitalize off of it when they're running for elections for larger seats, right? Because if you get the folks who are scared, the xenophobe folks, all coming out and turning out to vote because of this issue, maybe they'll support their guy who happens to support that issue as well, right? So it's a lot of different layers that are causing the challenge. And because of the black and brown tension, it makes it hard for like the mayor to figure out where to position and how to move forward in a way that brings people together. I imagine.
Well, we got to figure it out because, we've always been a welcoming city and we are a progressive city compared to most places in the country.
Yeah.
And we did have a rainbow coalition on a lot of levels here in this town, and we, I really just hope we can figure a way to welcome these folks as neighbors. I know that you did mention the state, and I did hear while I was driving back from way downstate. I was coming up from Bloomington then to Danville. I heard that the governor announced that there would not be any more money coming from the state right now. And I don't know what the prospect of the, with the feds coming up with money, with the work authorization, can you give us any info on? And I also remember hearing that some cities were requesting migrants come.
Yeah, I mean,
Wichita or St. Louis or someplace.
Yeah, I think largely it's about the narrative that because we're on defense about the situation rather than understanding that these folks, once they become taxpayers and citizens, are going to be a net benefit. Other cities see that and they're like, send them on over. We'll take some population, right? I think that overall, you kind of stated it right. The funds aren't necessarily coming. The work authorization needs to be expanded and hasn't been. So we have to have a real conversation about the cities can and can't do given the funds that it does have. But I think when we talk about Sanctuary City, the other thing to keep in mind is I think it's going to be a coin toss as to who the next president is, Democrat or Republican. If we end up with a Republican president, it's that much more important to have Sanctuary City ordinance in there, given how that can then play out. And so I think that we've got to stop being in crisis mode and focus on the next 6 months to a year and see what's coming down the pipe to be able to make the right decisions.
Well, we did have a good week for Democrats with Andy Beshear, with Virginia, with Ohio, a few other places. Katie Hogan was here a little while ago, and she said, ask him about the city's leadership at different levels from the mayor on down. How's it looking? And how could we improve?
I think it's, I like to level set for comparison to the last term, right? Mayor Lightfoot had a whole year before her crisis began, whereas this team is stepping, held chin deep into a real crisis, right? So it becomes harder to really understand how they're operating because they're taking on so much at once, right? They've got to figure out how these departments are working. So it's a work in progress. I think it's a little bit to be determined. But what I am grateful for is that unlike the last administration, we definitely are being let into, somewhat more when it comes to giving our feedback, working on legislation, trying to find solutions in a way that felt more combative last term under Lightfoot.
Well, I read this morning. Carlos Rosa kind of made a faux pas and got into it with some fellow members of the council, and he lost his positions. And they were naming people, perhaps it was in the Sun-Times, who were possible floor leaders in the future. Is that anything in your future?
Why are you wishing so much bad luck on me, my friend?
I'm not wishing. I saw your name. You were the last name listed as a maybe.
Yeah, no, I've got a lot of work to do as chair of the Immigrant and Refugee Rights Committee. I've got tons of work to do in the ward to make sure we're supporting the neighbors. I think there's a lot of other things that I like working on. I'll be honest, after spending a month in City Hall with budget season, I yearn for staying in the ward. And so I think part of me being able to interact more with the neighbors and solve for that, I view as a more direct way for me to make things better for folks. That being said, if folks were to bring it up, it's not something I wouldn't entertain, right? So.
Well, Andre, it's always good having you on. And can we get you to commit to coming on again in another few weeks, maybe? And to fill us in on how things are?
Yeah, no, as long as we book it on the calendar, they'll drag me around and put me in.
I like it. Yeah.
So
you made me go to a calendar rather than just a personal call. Is there anything we left out in this little interview that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the budget is also coming up. And I think that's if this was any other year, budget would be front and center, right? Now right. It's like fourth, fifth on the list. But that's looking good. In it, I was able to help negotiate to put funds towards a reparations subcommittee to start really working on that, because I think we need to show how much we're doing for our Black Chicagoans, as well as, you know, African descendants of slavery. We were able to get more ward office staff to be able to serve folks on the ground better. We got a Department of Environment coming. So I think there's a lot of good things to support in this budget. And we look forward to talking to our neighbors about it.
Well, you're a hell of a guy, and I want to thank you for coming on live from the Heartland again. And you will get my call again.
Yeah, I'm just following in y'all footsteps. You know, I'm glad to be here. So thank you for saying that.